"I desire you. You are magnificent," says the German general to the homosexual prisoner. Then he says something that will change both their lives forever. This is the true story of a forbidden love in the darkest days of World War II, a story that was hidden for decades. Stay until the end, because what happened when the war ended will leave you speechless. In this video, you'll hear the complete story of two men who met in the most unlikely circumstances during World War II. A German general and a homosexual prisoner whose lives intertwined in a concentration camp. You'll discover how love can bloom even in the depths of hell, how desire can transcend the boundaries of war, and how this relationship defied every rule of that terrible time. Prepare yourself, because this narrative will touch your heart and challenge everything you thought you knew about the war. Europe. The year was 1942. The Second World War was raging across the continent, devastating cities, destroying families, extinguishing millions of lives. It was a time of unspeakable horror, of industrial death, of humanity at its absolute worst. In the heart of this darkness stood the concentration camps, places designed for one purpose: to eliminate those the Nazi regime considered undesirable: Jews, Roma people, political dissidents, disabled individuals, and homosexuals, all marked for death simply for existing. Paragraph 175. That was the name of the German law that made homosexuality a crime. Under Nazi rule, this law became a death sentence. Thousands of gay men were arrested, branded with pink triangles, and sent to concentration camps. There, they faced some of the worst treatment imaginable. Other prisoners often avoided them, guards subjected them to special cruelty, and their survival rate was among the lowest of any group in the camps. This is the world where our story takes place. A world of absolute cruelty, where showing any humanity was seen as weakness, where love was forbidden, where being different meant death. Among the thousands of men imprisoned under paragraph 175 was a young Austrian named Stefan Kosinski. Born in 1920 in Vienna, Stefan was the son of a bookshop owner. He grew up surrounded by literature, art, and music. Vienna in the 20s and early 30s was a place of cultural richness. Despite the economic hardships following World War I, Stefan knew from a young age that he was different. He was attracted to men, not women. In the Vienna of his youth, there was a small but vibrant underground gay community. Stefan found acceptance there, found friends, found lovers. He worked in his father's bookshop, read voraciously, attended theater performances, lived a relatively happy life despite having to hide his true self from most of the world. But everything changed in 1938 when Nazi Germany annexed Austria. Overnight, Stefan's world became dangerous. The Nazis brought their laws, their hatred, their violence. The gay community that had provided Stefan with refuge went underground, terrified. Stefan tried to be careful. He stopped going to the places where gay men gathered. He avoided anyone who might expose him. But in 1941, someone denounced him. Perhaps a jealous former lover, perhaps someone who simply hated what Stefan was. We'll never know for certain. The Gestapo came to the bookshop one cold morning in November. They arrested Stefan in front of his parents, accused him of violating paragraph 175, of being a homosexual and therefore an enemy of the German people. His mother screamed, his father pleaded, but nothing could save him. Stefan was 21 years old when they took him away. He would never see his parents again. They would both die before the war ended, his father of a heart attack, his mother of grief. Stefan was sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, one of the first and largest camps established by the Nazi regime. He was stripped, shaved, deloused, and given a uniform with a pink triangle sewn onto it. That triangle marked him as homosexual, made him a target for everyone in the camp. Life in Sachsenhausen was hell. Stefan was assigned to one of the worst work details, breaking rocks in a quarry. The labor was backbreaking, the hours endless, the food barely enough to keep a man alive. Guards beat prisoners for the slightest infraction or sometimes for no reason at all. Disease was rampant. Death was everywhere. Men with pink triangles faced additional horrors. Other prisoners, trying to prove they weren't weak or associated with homosexuals, often treated them with contempt. Guards subjected them to special humiliations and tortures. Many didn't survive more than a few months. But Stefan was strong. Not just physically, though the years working in his father's shop had given him some muscle, but mentally. He had his books, his memories, his imagination. At night, in the filthy barracks, while other men sobbed or prayed or went mad, Stefan would close his eyes and recite poetry. Goethe, Schiller, Rilke. The words kept him human when everything around him was designed to make him an animal. He survived 1 year, then 2. By 1943, Stefan was one of the longest surviving pink triangle prisoners in Sachsenhausen. His face was gaunt, his body skeletal, his hands covered in calluses and scars. But his eyes still held life, still held defiance. Now we turn to the other man in this story, General Klaus von Albrecht. His story was completely different, yet their fates would become inextricably linked. Klaus von Albrecht was born in 1900 in Prussia, into an old military family. His father had been a general in World War I. His grandfather had served under Bismarck. Military service wasn't just expected of Klaus, it was assumed, predestined. Klaus attended military academy, excelled in his studies, and received his commission as a young lieutenant. He was intelligent, disciplined, and capable. He rose through the ranks steadily during the years between the wars. When the Nazi Party came to power in 1933, Klaus was already a major. He was not particularly political. He saw the Nazis as crude, their ideology as simplistic, but he was a soldier. Soldiers followed orders. That's what he told himself. As war approached, Klaus was promoted to colonel, then to general. He commanded troops in the invasion of Poland, in the conquest of France. He was efficient, professional, and successful. The Nazi leadership rewarded him with medals and further promotions. But Klaus carried a secret that could have destroyed him just as surely as it destroyed Stefan. Klaus was also attracted to men. He had hidden this truth his entire life, had married a woman he respected but didn't love, had fathered 2 children, had maintained the perfect facade of a Prussian officer. But inside, he knew what he was. And he lived in constant terror that someone would discover his secret. In the rigid masculine world of the German military, any hint of homosexuality was career suicide at minimum, execution at worst. Klaus buried his desires so deeply that he sometimes convinced himself they didn't exist. He threw himself into his work, into the war, into anything that would distract him from the truth. In early 1943, General von Albrecht was given a new assignment. He was to take command of the administrative operations at Sachsenhausen concentration camp. It wasn't a combat posting, which disappointed him, but it was an important logistical position. The camp provided labor for war industries, and keeping that labor force functioning was crucial to the war effort. Klaus arrived at Sachsenhausen in March of 1943. He was 43 years old, gray at the temples, with the bearing of a career military officer. He wore his uniform impeccably, maintained strict discipline, and ran the camp with Prussian efficiency. He told himself he was just doing his job. He didn't think too much about what the camp really was, what happened there. He focused on production numbers, work schedules, resource allocation. It was easier that way. But one day in June of 1943, something happened that would change everything. Klaus was conducting an inspection of one of the work details. It was a brutally hot day, and the prisoners were laboring in the quarry, breaking rocks under the merciless sun. Guards stood watch, rifles ready, occasionally shouting or striking a prisoner who moved too slowly. Klaus walked along the edge of the quarry, observing with a critical eye. and then he saw Stefan. The young man was swinging a sledgehammer, bringing it down on a large stone. Despite the starvation, despite the abuse, there was still strength in his movements. Sweat poured down his face. His hands were bloody, but he worked with a kind of fierce determination. Something about the way Stefan moved caught Klaus's attention. The grace, despite the brutality of the labor, the defiance in his eyes, the refusal to be broken. Klaus stopped walking. He stared. And for the first time in years, he felt something he had tried to kill inside himself. Desire. He noticed the pink triangle on Stefan's uniform. A homosexual, like himself. The irony was almost unbearable. Klaus forced himself to look away and continue his inspection, but he couldn't get the image of Stefan out of his mind. That night, alone in his quarters, he thought about the young prisoner with the haunted eyes and unbroken spirit. Over the following weeks, Klaus found excuses to observe the quarry work detail. He told himself he was just ensuring efficiency, but he knew the truth. He was looking for Stefan, and Stefan had noticed the general watching him. At first, he assumed it meant something bad was coming. Generals didn't pay attention to individual prisoners unless they were about to be punished or killed. But as the days passed and nothing happened, Stefan began to wonder. There was something in the way the general looked at him. Something that wasn't hatred or contempt. Something almost like recognition. One evening in July, Klaus made a decision that went against every rule, every regulation, every principle of the Nazi system he served. He ordered Stefan to be brought to his private quarters. The guards who received the order were surprised but didn't question it. Generals did what they wanted. If von Albrecht wanted a prisoner brought to him, that was his business. Stefan was terrified when the guards came for him. Being singled out by a high-ranking officer almost never meant anything good. He was certain he was about to be tortured or killed. They brought him to the general's quarters, a simple but comfortable room in the administrative building. It was the first time Stefan had been inside a heated building in 2 years. The guards pushed him inside and left, closing the door behind them. Klaus sat behind his desk, still in uniform. Stefan stood at attention, trembling slightly, waiting for whatever horror was about to unfold. For a long moment, Klaus just looked at him. Then he said in German, "Sit down." Stefan hesitated, then sat in the chair across from the desk. His mind raced. What did this general want? Klaus poured 2 glasses of schnapps. He pushed one across the desk toward Stefan. The young man stared at it as if it were poison. "Drink," Klaus said. It wasn't quite an order, but it wasn't a suggestion either. Stefan took the glass with shaking hands and drank. The alcohol burned his throat, unused to anything but watery soup and stale bread. Klaus drank his own glass, then poured another for both of them. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Klaus spoke. "What is your name?" "Stefan Kosinski, sir," Stefan replied, his voice hoarse from disuse. "How long have you been here, Stefan?" "Nearly 2 years, sir." Klaus nodded slowly. "And before? What did you do before?" "I worked in my father's bookshop in Vienna, sir." "You read books?" "Yes, sir. Many books." Another silence. Then Klaus did something that shocked Stefan to his core. The general stood, walked around the desk, and knelt beside Stefan's chair. He looked up at the young prisoner's gaunt face. "I desire you," Klaus said quietly. "You are magnificent." Stefan's breath caught. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. A German general, confessing desire for a male prisoner. It was impossible. It was suicidal. It was... "Then he says," Klaus continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, "I know what you are, and I am the same. I have hidden it all my life, but I cannot hide it from you." Tears began streaming down Stefan's face, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, of being understood, of not being alone in this hell. Klaus reached up and gently wiped the tears from Stefan's face. "I can protect you," he said. "I can make your life here more bearable. But I need to not be alone anymore." What happened next was the beginning of the most dangerous relationship imaginable. A Nazi general and a homosexual prisoner, both risking everything for moments of connection, of intimacy, of love in a place designed to destroy such things. Klaus arranged for Stefan to be transferred to a work detail inside the administrative building. Light cleaning work, sorting papers, tasks that wouldn't break his body. He gave Stefan extra food, smuggled from his own rations. Slowly, Stefan began to regain some weight, some strength. And in the evenings, several times a week, Klaus would have Stefan brought to his quarters. To anyone who might have questioned it, Klaus had an explanation ready. The prisoner was teaching him about literature, about culture. A general had to remain educated after all. But what really happened in those rooms was far more profound. They talked. For hours they talked about everything. Books, music, art, philosophy, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Stefan recited poetry, and Klaus listened with tears in his eyes. And yes, they were intimate. They found comfort in each other's arms, found a connection that transcended the horror surrounding them. For a few hours at a time, they weren't a general and a prisoner. They were just two men who had found each other in impossible circumstances. Stefan knew the relationship was built on a terrible power imbalance. Klaus literally held his life in his hands, but he also knew that Klaus was risking everything too. If anyone discovered what they were doing, both would be destroyed. The relationship continued through the fall of 1943 and into 1944. Klaus became more reckless, keeping Stefan in his quarters longer, being less careful about who might see them together. Other prisoners noticed that Stefan was being treated differently, that he had gained weight, that he wasn't working himself to death anymore. Some were jealous, some were suspicious, but no one said anything. Speaking up about anything in a concentration camp was dangerous. The guards also noticed, but they misunderstood. They assumed Stefan was informing on other prisoners that he was a collaborator. This actually helped maintain the secret, as it explained why the general showed him favor. Through the winter of 1944, as the war began to turn against Germany, as the Eastern Front collapsed and Allied bombs fell on German cities, Klaus and Stefan created a small world of their own. In Klaus's quarters, surrounded by books Stefan had requested and Klaus had obtained, they built something like happiness. Klaus told Stefan about his life, his loveless marriage, his children who barely knew him. He confessed that he had never felt for anyone what he felt for Stefan. Stefan, in turn, told Klaus about Vienna, about his parents, about the life that had been stolen from him. They made plans that both knew were probably impossible. When the war ended, if they both survived, they would run away together. Go to Switzerland or Sweden, somewhere they could be themselves. It was a fantasy, but it kept them going. But reality was closing in. By early 1945, it was clear Germany was losing the war. The Red Army was advancing from the east, the Americans and British from the west. Berlin was being bombed nightly. Orders came to begin evacuating the concentration camps. The Nazis wanted to hide the evidence of what they had done, wanted to prevent prisoners from being liberated and telling their stories. In April of 1945, the order came to evacuate Sachsenhausen. Prisoners who could walk would be marched west. Those who couldn't would be left behind or killed. Klaus knew what this meant. The death marches, as they were called, were as deadly as the camps themselves. Prisoners, already starved and weak, would be forced to walk for hundreds of miles with little food or water. Those who fell behind were shot. He couldn't bear the thought of Stefan enduring that. So Klaus made his final, desperate decision. On the night before the evacuation was to begin, Klaus gave Stefan civilian clothes, papers identifying him as a German citizen, money, and a map. He told him to escape during the chaos of the evacuation, to make his way west toward the American lines. Stefan refused to go without Klaus, but Klaus knew he couldn't leave. He was a general in the German army. He had a duty, however much he hated it, and if he deserted, they would hunt him down. "You have to survive," Klaus told Stefan, holding him tight. "You have to live and tell the world what happened here. Tell them about the men with pink triangles. Tell them we existed, that we loved, that we were human." They spent one last night together. In the morning, in the confusion as the camp prepared to evacuate, Stefan slipped away. He made it through the gates, using the papers Klaus had given him, and disappeared into the chaos of a collapsing Germany. Klaus watched him go, knowing he would never see him again. The evacuation of Sachsenhausen turned into exactly the nightmare Klaus had feared. Thousands of prisoners marched west, and thousands died along the way. Klaus was required to accompany the march, to maintain order. It was during this march that Klaus's own fate was sealed. A group of SS officers noticed that he seemed distracted, that he wasn't enforcing discipline as strictly as expected. They began watching him, questioning his loyalty. When the march finally stopped near the Elbe River with American forces closing in, Klaus was arrested by his own side. Someone had searched his quarters back at Sachsenhausen and found letters Stefan had written to him, poetry they had shared. The evidence was undeniable. Klaus von Albrecht, general in the German army, was tried by an SS court for homosexuality and treason. He was found guilty and executed by firing squad on May 1, 1945, just a week before Germany's surrender. He died without knowing if Stefan had survived. Stefan did survive. He made it through the chaos of Germany's collapse, posing as a displaced civilian. When American forces arrived, he revealed his true identity and his story. He spent months in displaced persons camps, slowly regaining his health. He testified about what he had seen in Sachsenhausen, though he never mentioned Klaus by name, protecting him even after death. In 1946, Stefan managed to return to Vienna. His parents' bookshop had been destroyed in the bombing, his parents were dead, but the city was still standing. He decided to stay and rebuild. Stefan never spoke publicly about his relationship with Klaus. The world wasn't ready to hear about a love between a Nazi general and a concentration camp prisoner, especially not a homosexual love. It would have been dismissed, mocked, or worse. But he never forgot. For the rest of his life, Stefan kept the memory of those evenings in Klaus's quarters. The conversations, the poetry, the brief moments of human connection in the midst of hell. Stefan lived until 1998, dying at the age of 78. Before his death, he finally wrote down his story, including his relationship with Klaus. He left the manuscript to a Holocaust memorial organization with instructions that it be sealed for 20 years after his death. In 2018, the manuscript was opened and published. Stefan's story became known to the world. The relationship between the general and the prisoner, the forbidden love in the darkest days of the war. Historians debated the ethics of the relationship. Some saw it as exploitative, a powerful man taking advantage of a helpless prisoner. Others saw it as a complex human connection that transcended the categories of oppressor and victim. But what cannot be debated is that both men suffered for who they were. Klaus, who served a regime that would have killed him for his true nature, who lived a lie his entire life until he met Stefan. And Stefan, who was imprisoned and nearly destroyed for the crime of being himself. Their story reminds us that even in the worst circumstances humanity has created, people still find ways to connect, to love, to be human. It reminds us that the categories we create, enemy and friend, oppressor and victim, are sometimes more complicated than we want to admit. It also reminds us of the countless other stories that were never told, the thousands of men who wore pink triangles and died without anyone knowing their names or their stories. Stefan's survival and eventual testimony gave voice to some of those silenced voices. The relationship between Klaus and Stefan doesn't redeem the horror of the concentration camps. It doesn't excuse the crimes of the Nazi regime. But it does show us that even in absolute darkness, the human capacity for connection, for intimacy, for love, somehow persists. "I desire you. You are magnificent," the general said to the prisoner. And in saying those words, he acknowledged both their shared humanity and their shared doom. Because in the world they lived in, such desire, such recognition, was forbidden and fatal. Both men paid the ultimate price for being who they were. Klaus died before a firing squad. Stefan survived but lost everything and everyone he loved. Their relationship lasted less than 2 years, most of it conducted in secret, in fear, in the shadow of death. But for those brief moments in Klaus's quarters, surrounded by books and poetry, they created something the concentration camp couldn't destroy. They created a space where they could be themselves, where they could love and be loved, where they were more than a general and a prisoner, more than oppressor and victim. They were just two men who found each other in hell and held on for as long as they could. If this story moved you, if you felt the tragedy and the strange beauty of this impossible love, leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this video so more people can learn about the men who wore pink triangles, about the stories that were hidden for so long, and remember that love, in all its forms, has always existed and will always exist, even in the darkest times. Even when the world says it's wrong, even when the penalty is death, people will find each other, will connect, will love. That's the legacy of Stefan and Klaus. That's what they want us to remember.